Good morning. Welcome to this CEPS-ECMI webinar on corporate sustainability reporting, setting an EU standard. During today's webinar, we will be discussing the newly launched Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that was launched last month by the European Commission. This directive is supposed to be revising the non-financial reporting, the existing non-financial reporting directive. For our discussion today, we have an excellent panel, but before I introduce the excellent panel, I would like to let you know that after the introduction speeches by the panelists, there will be a possibility to ask questions to the panelists. For this, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So please put there your question. If you want to address it to a particular panelist, please also then indicate the name of the panelist. So during today's meeting, we will be discussing the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive proposal. We start with a short introduction on the proposal by Elena Flores. She has been instrumental in the preparation of the proposal and is maybe the best place to first introduce the proposal and what are the key features and what were the motivations in order to come up with this proposal as it is today. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Willem. Good morning, everyone. Well, as Willem said, there's been different reasons for the amendments that we introduced via this proposal. I won't go into the details because I know many of you are already familiarized with the current sustainability framework and the current sustainability practices that are far from ideal. But basically, we had four objectives in the revision of this proposal. We needed to enable that comparable, reliable, and relevant information was available out there or is available out there in order to reduce the systemic risks to the financial sector, to the financial system that arises from the fact that investors cannot properly take account of all these risks arising from sustainability issues. The other objective was also to enable these investors basically to channel capital to companies that do address the sustainability crisis and don't exacerbate it. And also the third objective from this point of view of the use that different stakeholder groups make of this information was the possibility to make companies accountable for their impacts on the environment and on people. Our fourth objective, of course, is also to simplify and reduce this unnecessary cost on companies that may arise from different ad hoc requests for information from different investors, from different stakeholders. The availability and the requests to comply against different frameworks is already a reality, and by putting together this proposal, these new requirements, the objective is also to eliminate to the maximum extent possible all those additional requests that may arise. So I'm going to touch upon the main changes that we propose in this directive. It's important to mention, just for clarity on the process, that what the Commission has put forward in April is a legislative proposal that amends 4 pieces of legislation, of EU legislation: the Accounting Directive, where the current requirements of the NFRD stand, the Transparency Directive, the Audit Directive, and the Audit Regulation. So in reality, is one amending act that amends 4 different legislative acts, 3 of them which need to be transposed by member states into national law. So in April, the process started, the Commission adopted a proposal, and now negotiations will follow between Council and Parliament, and only once the political agreement is reached and the legal act in itself is adopted would it become applicable. So basically, we are aiming for a first reporting cycle according to the new requirements in 2024, covering financial year 2023. So that a little bit of a framework of the process in itself. Now coming to the biggest changes that the proposal introduced, and not wanting to go into too much detail to the time available, I'm going to start focusing on the scope question, which is of course very important. The proposal basically includes the extension of the scope to all large companies as defined in the Accounting Directive and all listed companies in regulated markets excluding micro undertakings. And for these listed SMEs, a special regime is foreseen. There is a phase-in approach, so they would only have to require with these obligations 3 years after the large companies, and they will only have to comply with simplified standards. I'll come to the standards question in a moment because, of course, is the centerpiece of the proposal. But just to make the link between this scope of listed SMEs and the simplified standards. So the exemption to subsidiaries remains as it was the case, or as it is the case today in the current requirements. If a parent company reports at group level, at consolidated level, then the subsidiary in the EU does not need to report as well. It is exempted. But of course, the parent company needs to comply with the EU requirements, or in the future, if any other standards would be considered equivalent by the Commission, then that would also be an option. So as regards scopes, that's very important because it translates into an extension from about 11,000 companies to almost 50,000 companies. And of course, one of the main problems raised by users of this information is that many companies from which they needed that info weren't reporting at all. So making the legal framework mandatory was also a prerequisite to make possible that investors, as I said, make the proper decisions, and also that civil society organizations can hold accountable these companies. I'll move to the second point, which is the coverage of sustainability topics and reporting areas, what we call reporting areas. Sustainability topics, basically, as the current directive already requires, all ESG factors would be covered. So in comparison with the current text, basically there is an addition or a reference to governance in more general terms. So not only to anti-bribery and corruption, but also, generally speaking, other governance issues such as the role and composition of the board or any business relationships that the company may have beyond its clients or suppliers. So in this respect, this is broadened, and in the list basically of subtopics or of detailed aspects that the standards would need to cover, the proposal elaborates on the different ESG matters, basically. About reporting areas, of course, when we talk about reporting areas, we basically refer to these different points listed in the current directive, like policies, risks, a brief description of the business model, metrics, and so on, KPIs, sorry. So in this respect, we believed it was necessary to specify and explicitly require certain aspects that weren't today in the level 1 framework. And then, of course, this, in the same way as the different relevant sustainability subtopics, if you like for instance, I don't know, reporting on biodiversity or reporting on circular economy and things like that, that will be developed and that will be specified in the standards. But still, in the level 1 framework, in the directive itself, we already added a reference to other elements. For example, there is a requirement to report on targets and the progress towards achieving those targets. We saw from many studies carried out by many interesting organizations, private organizations, that indeed this reporting is lacking. It's not very extended, and it's of course very important. So like this, there are other aspects that you can see in the proposal. If you want to look for it, it's in Article 19A and 29A, and there you can find the list of new matters. But as I say, there are aspects such as targets and progress towards achieving them, role of the board and the management. There is a clearer distinction between due diligence, adverse impacts, and then on the other hand, the risks to the company. And then also, and very important, it is very explicitly included the need to report on the whole value chain. So there are different aspects. All of them, we found them were critical to be there in order basically to frame the work of the standards, to frame the content of those standards. So I encourage you to have a look and check the different elements. It's also important to mention that if you see that list, you'll see that the most important elements of the TCFD, so the 4 pillars of the TCFD, are embedded. There is a reference to strategy, this reference to target that I mentioned, targets, the reference to the role of the board and the management, and of course indicators were already there. But in a way, it's clearer or more explicitly included and embedded in the different reporting areas of the directive. Now, coming to the standards, which is one of the most important changes that we introduced. We think the requirement to report against reporting standards is instrumental to this proposal, not only to ensure comparable information, but also to allow for digitalization, to allow for proper supervision, to allow for the verification, for the assurance of the content of the information. So basically, we need a reference point according to which all these other aspects can be dealt with. So that's why it's instrumental and it's the centerpiece of this proposal. So as I said, there would be a set of standards that would be mandatory for large companies to report against. And then SMEs, the listed SMEs that are included under the scope, only those SMEs will be included under the scope, are allowed to follow or to comply according to simplified SME standards. So the idea is that these simplified SME standards are also available for voluntary use for all those SMEs, which are the biggest majority that are not under the scope of the new requirements. So the idea is to provide a tool to all those other SMEs that will basically still, because they already do, but they continue to receive requests for information and even increasing requests for information, not only as a consequence of these new requirements on more larger companies, but also as a consequence of this high interest by investors in the sustainability aspects of companies. There will be, of course, effects, and are already effects or knock-on effects from the SFRD, and the taxonomy regulation. So in this respect, we think it's crucial that these SMEs have a tool that they can use if they want to voluntarily provide this information. And it's also important because it would serve as a reference point to all those other larger companies or banks or other financial actors that need information. So it's also very important, even if it's only for voluntary use, when SMEs find it's important to them to use it. So on standards, there are different criteria in the proposal. There is the need to cover all these ESG topics, to take account of EU legislation and initiatives. This to us is a very important point, because one of the biggest points of this proposal is that it aims at ensuring this coherence between all the sustainable finance framework. So basically, the proposal requires that the content of the standard, so the specific information, takes account of the underlying criteria in the taxonomy, takes account of the needs of financial market participants subject to the SFDR. So for us, this coherence aspect is very, very important. Likewise, it's also very important that these European standards take account of any global developments and, of course, of already existing standards, because the idea is not to reinvent the wheel, it's to build on the most accepted and the best elements of existing standards. So it's not the idea to start from scratch, and it's not the idea to work in isolation. So in this respect, there's also an explicit reference that the standards need to build on these existing initiatives and also consider any upcoming ones. And in this respect, there is even a review introduced, if you like, a review obligation on the Commission to revise these standards at least every 3 years, to take on board or to take account of any developments, including those developments of international initiatives at global level. So just to reassure everyone that we are cooperating and we are in contact with the different initiatives, globally speaking, also the IFRS Foundation initiative, of course. And in that respect, what we propose at this moment is the famous co-constructive approach that was presented by the EFRAG task force in their report, when they put together this very good report on preparatory work on standard setting, basically. So it's a two-way cooperation between any global initiatives and the EU work, basically, and it would imply really the sharing of ideas. So it's really bilateral, where we have this at the heart of the work we're doing, because we know and we support any global approach, but we also need to ensure that we basically can go further in requiring reporting at European level. Sorry, it's very important that double materiality perspective is respected in our jurisdiction. It's very important that all ESG topics and not only climate or only environment are considered. And of course, it's also super important that the way or the content that is reported by EU companies meets the need of other financial market participants that are subject to EU legislation. So in this respect, it's clear that we need a European approach, but the idea is, of course, to be aligned and for these standards to be coherent with any development at global level. And of course, that bilaterally the EU and all these global initiatives can interact to ensure that this coordination is a reality. So that as for the standards and the international developments going on at the moment. As for how these standards will be developed and how will they be adopted, the idea is that EFRAG develops what in practice would be draft standards. Then the Commission would consult the relevant EU bodies, and then it would adopt these standards as delegated acts. So basically, the standard setter is the Commission. The delegated acts are adopted by the Commission, and the standards are adopted by the Commission. EFRAG provides the technical advice to the Commission. So that is with regard to standards. The proposal envisages two sets of standards, one to be adopted by October 22 and another one to be adopted by October 2023. The idea is that in the first set of standards, as a minimum, all the relevant information that financial market participants need is covered. And of course, that information about all sustainability matters and all reporting areas is also covered. And the idea of the second set of standards is that any additional complementary information that's needed where necessary is added, and also that sector-specific elements are included. So the sectoral approach would come at the second stage. We also have to be very mindful of the time that we've got. We have set ourselves a very, very tight timeline, but it also needs to be realistic. So that's why we needed to separate a little bit in two phases, the most important things, the basics basically, and then elaborate further at a second stage. I have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to fly through the three last points that I wanted to mention to you about the changes. The next one is the location of the reported information. So basically, information should be included in the management report if this proposal is agreed by co-legislators. The current requirements allow member states to allow for the separate publication of this information, and 20 member states have done so. But the proposal basically includes all the information in the management report in order to put at this equal footing financial and non-financial, or now called sustainability information, and also to ensure that information is available in a timely manner, so that both financial and sustainability reporting is to be found in the same place and at the same time by especially by investors who are the ones who really analyze both sides of the company. So that's also a relevant change. And then the two last changes are on assurance and on digitalization. On assurance, there is a requirement to provide limited assurance by the auditor. So basically, the statutory auditor would also have to give an opinion on the sustainability reporting by the company. And the proposal also allows member states to open up the market to other third-party providers other than the statutory auditor to provide this assurance. If the member state decides to do so, it has to put in place a framework basically that is consistent with the requirements that apply to the statutory auditor. In this respect, then it would be ensured that these people, these third parties, have the necessary expertise, for instance. So this is allowed, but again, it's a decision left for the member states. And then the proposal also envisages the transition to a reasonable assurance requirement if the Commission and when the Commission adopts assurance standards for reasonable assurance. So it's really about the assurance standards, not about the reporting standards. And in this case, the reasonable assurance engagement would be required. And then last but not least, it's very important to us, the digitalization aspect. We need to make sure that this information can be easily exploited by users and that all this effort that companies put into reporting pay off. So in this respect, there is a requirement to basically tag the sustainability reporting, to mark up the information so that it can be machine readable. So companies would need to do that. And also there is a requirement on member states to make all this reporting available, or to make it reach the officially appointed mechanisms that are designated in each member states in the context of reporting by issuers, by listed companies. So the idea is that because these OEMs will be interconnected in the context of the European single access point, to ensure a single access point to all financial and sustainability information, the idea is that because these OEMs will be interlinked, this information needs to reach the OEM in order to be available in this single access point. So that's the last aspect regarding digitalization, also very important. And then here we see the links with the ESAP initiative that colleagues are working on, and that it's down the pipeline this year. And this would be the last element of the proposal that I think it's worth mentioning. Happy to take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Elena. You highlighted, I think, the main aspects, but also very much, I thank you for that, the motives on why you made certain choices in the proposal. And now I would like to turn to Elena Flores from Intesa San Paulo. You're on the one hand the preparer, but also a user of sustainability information. What are your views on the proposal as launched and just explained by Elena?
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me at this webinar. I would like to make a few points on what on the proposal directive and what Elena's just said, and I would like to start from highlighting some points that we would consider as strengths of these proposals. One is the comparability. It was mentioned before. Having a mandatory common reporting standard should ensure that information is comparable and that all relevant information is disclosed. So, of course, this is a key point, because we are preparers, but as it was mentioned, we are also users of these information, and of course, having a common standard, the digitalization also of the process is important for us. Second point would be the enlargement of scope and SMEs involvement. So here again, we need more information from our customers to include in our system, so as users, but also as preparers, because as preparers we need to have information from our customers in order to disclose data on our portfolios. So involvement of SMEs is particularly important, and also to have proportional standards for them, as it was mentioned. Third point is on assurance. Assurance in some countries it was already mandatory. It has been working very well, and it also requires companies to organize themselves in order to have quality information. So, for example, for us, non-financial information, sustainability information is managed by the Planning and Control Department on the same platform that they use for financial data. So it's really same level of quality, and this of course is going to strengthen the quality of the data and reliability of the data. Of course, regarding assurance, we are still lacking a commonly agreed standard for the assurance of sustainability information. So we would like also to know what kind of assurance, especially on some new requirements such as forward-looking information, qualitative information, intangibles, and so forth. Then I would have some, let's say, I would call them point of attention. I'm glad that Elena was mentioning these before as a very strong point for them, is regulatory consistency. So we need to have a regulation that is consistent, that is coherent, so that we know, looking at taxonomy, SFDR, green asset ratio, and so forth, we need to have rules that ensure that all the information that we provide is coherent and is meeting the regulation. And second point was the, let's say, that it meets the expectations of our stakeholders, in particular of investors that may be EU investors, but also maybe are non-EU investors. So looking at the standards, we are using GRI. We have adopted also SASB in order to meet investors' expectation on that. Climate information is more and more important for us. So looking at the TCFD recommendations, So after these 2 points that I was mentioning, consistency between the different regulation and also compatibility with the expectations of our stakeholders and investors in particular, means that we would like to have one report includes all the information that we need to give to our stakeholders, to the markets, to the regulators, and the sooner we have it, of course, the better for us. I've heard that it's due for October 22. Then, of course, there is another point on the new requirements, so additional aspects of the regulation. So, forward-looking targets. This is particularly important, thinking about, for example, net zero targets, for example, for financial institutions, intangibles, ESG due diligence. So what do we mean by these aspects? How are we going to implement them? What is the expectation? So clearly, on these are aspects that we need to understand better what is required from us. And lastly, sort of critical point for us is on the location of the report. I understand the principle, meaning that sustainability information is as important as financial information, let's say traditional financial information. So it should be included in the management report. Having said that, in some countries it was mentioned allowed for the preparation of a separate report. In Italy, most of the companies were developed a separate report, and so there are issues that need to be resolved, such as the length of the documents. So in Italy, for example, financial reports are extremely long, and also the timing. So these points are points that we need to address in order to be able to give a comprehensive reporting to our stakeholders. Thank you, and I'm available for Q&A later.
Thank you very much, Elena, for sharing your views on the proposal. Let's now move to Victor van Hoorn of Eurosif. He will give also the perspective from the sustainable investments community. Victor.
Thank you, Willem, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Yes, Eurosif, the European Sustainable Investment Forum, and we bring together the sustainable investment forums in different EU member states, which are associations that often have already existed in some cases for more than 20 years, and bringing together investors that have sustainability at the heart of their investment considerations. I think I could repeat a lot of what the two first speakers have said already, because a lot of the points raised echoed our feeling. But I would say that when we discussed it with my membership, I would say we're 85% there on the proposal. We're very happy with the proposal from the Commission. I think, as the previous speaker have said, the points about regulatory consistency with the set of EU sustainable finance policies adopted in the previous mandate of the Commission, the taxonomy, the SFDR, the climate and Paris aligned benchmarks. So I think we recognize a lot of that in the proposal on the way that European standard is going to be developed. We're very happy to see the principle of double materiality being fully embedded and strengthened further. So I think these are very positive developments, and we see very much this need for a European standard that was quite well emphasized by the Commission in the opening remarks. This is something very important that we actually move to a phase where people have reported on sustainability, where we move to a phase where there's much more systematic and standard and comparable information. For us as investors, most of our members look at it twofold. One way is looking at the data and the insights this can provide in their investment decision and how they can embed those sustainability factors. And actually, let's not forget about it, also potentially deliver some higher performance or outperformance to their clients, because they do take into account those material ESG factors. And on the other side, there's this compliance and reporting requirements by the legislation, which, let's face it, they're very important, but they are going to be challenging in the years to come. Our members are spending a lot of time getting ready to fully embed the SFDR in their processes, and that's something that's very challenging, with data availability remaining a constant challenge. I think when I look at when I said we're 85% there, I think the one point I'd like to raise particular focus here is on net zero and climate mitigation. I think we've seen already, we're very happy to see in the proposal this recognition that it is important for companies gradually to start explaining to investors and stakeholders how their business models are going to align with these 1.5 degree scenarios underpinning the Paris Climate Agreement. I think probably most of us read the quite dire forecast from the International Energy Agency in this last week, scenario on net zero, and what actually it means in terms of transformations for our economy. And I would say what we're seeing in the market, particularly ahead of the COP26 later this year, is I would call a flourishing of net zero commitments, be it by financial institutions as well as non-financial companies. Actually, non-financial companies be probably the most important ones in the transition, in the decarbonization trajectories that we need to follow at a quite accelerated pace if we want to hit those carbon neutrality objectives by 2050. And I think the challenge is very rapidly not going to be a question of net zero commitments, but it's much more going to be a question of, are those real commitments? Do they make sense from a scientific perspective, from a credibility perspective? We've got a couple of Dutch people on the panel here, and we've seen last week what happened with Royal Dutch Shell and its shareholders, and a number of its shareholders raising some very big question marks around some of the assumption used. And for us, I think that's where we still see potential for further improving the proposal. Is actually having a bit more robust requirements around the scenarios that companies use, and disclosing very transparently what scenario they use, how they compare with publicly available scenarios if they're different, questions around the assumptions in the essential decarbonization trajectories for some of the key sectors. Often you have to have sectoral decarbonization pathways. We all know it is really at the end of the day about manufacturing, transport, utilities, energy, agriculture, and real estate. Those 5 sectors are going to be determined on whether we make or don't make those objectives. And there, I think it's important that we get a lot more transparency around that. And the third main point I would say is also the use of carbon offsetting, and essentially, having your budget be a fully closed budget. And where we've seen, I think, sometimes rather less realistic, or frankly unrealistic, reliance on offsetting techniques to make the net zero commitments. So I would say we obviously understand that a lot of that is going to be done through the standard setting process itself around climate issues. But I would say from a Eurosif perspective, where we definitely see making it from an 85 to 100% perfect proposal is for us to really strengthen that language there, so that the basic building blocks and parameters for the net zero commitments are there. And I think, as I said, on average, we are very happy with the rest of the proposal. Obviously, our members would have desired some level of reasonable assurance rather than limited assurance, but that's something that it's going to be developed further down the line. And I think it's very good that there's already the intention expressed in the proposal to move in that direction in the future. So why don't I stop here, and then obviously I'm available and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much also to you, Victor, for sharing your views on the proposal. And you already said for 85% it's there, but 15% you indicated what should be done in addition, and in particular also make it more forward-looking. I took from your notes. Let's go now to Jean-Philippe Desmartins, He is representing EFAS, and with that, giving the view of the financial analyst. Jean-Philippe, what are your observations on the proposal?
Yes, thank you, Willem. So, as you said, I'm speaking in the name of EFAS, the European Association of Financial Analysts. I will shortly list a number of points and remarks. The first one is to say that the timing is good. The age of pioneers for CSR and sustainable finance is over, and it's a good news. And so we can think about a progressive standardization / harmonization. The second point is that we do consider that with this report and progress, we can think about seeing the reduction of the risk of greenwashing, and we can also say rainbow washing, because sometimes we have some surprising regarding social and governance issues and not only environment. The third point is that we can also consider that in Europe, we have the leadership regarding CSR and sustainable finance at this stage because of political willingness, but also because of the curve of experience of the last 20 years coming from corporates and investors. It has also been said, and it's an important step, that Europe, and with this report, we see the promotion of the concept of double materiality, which is key. Last but not least, we have officially a guarantee that there will be coordination between Europe and the other and the global initiatives that we are seeing built around the IFRS with value reporting foundations, SASB, GRI, and so on. It has been said. We do consider it's important to have this coordination. We note, and it's a good thing also, that the report deals with a large number of ESG issues, and we do consider it's very important. It's in line with the roads and the definition of sustainable development, which has been formalized in 1987. And of course, climate is an urgency, but never forget that if you want to deal with the climate, you need education, and education is a social issue. Complexity. There is a risk of complexity, not in this report, but when you had all the different initiatives at the European level, such as taxonomy, just to give an examples, we are facing a wall, and this is really the biggest risk as investors we see for corporates, but also for investors. Never forget that you can have convictions and be simple. And then it's also linked with this complexity. Also think about flexibility. Of course, we need better regulation and better standards, but we also need that corporates and investors can breathe also. So it means that, of course, we need some, at the end of the day, we need a list of generic KPIs, for instance, but limited one, in order that corporates and investors can think about other alternatives such as industry KPIs, and that's a job done by SASB, for instance, but also specific KPIs. In this report, the importance of intangible is emphasized, and we do consider that also it's important, and intangibles are unique, so we also need specific. Adaptation to small and mid caps, that will be a challenge, and we are very happy to see small and mid caps SMEs on board, but here again they need to breathe, and so we have to think about the question of their resources, and not only the timing, but really think about that they need to be lean. And last but not least, to conclude, it has already been said, but as investors, the concept of one report, integrated report, is key. Just because investors are normal people, so they just have one brain. So one brain, one report. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much also, Jean-Philippe, for sharing your views and those of EFAS on the proposal. I won't repeat all the points, but I take that you are positive in the sense of the EU is taking the leadership. On the other hand, there are some challenges ahead, and which partially are addressed in the proposal, but also need to very much come when the standards are being worked out. Thank you for this. We now turn to Armand Karsten from the VEB, which is the Dutch Investor Association, who represents primarily retail investors. Armand, could you share your views from the retail investor perspective?
Thank you very much. I hope that I am audible. First of all, I was charmed by Jean-Philippe's comment that investors have only one brain, because I'm not, of course, one to accuse investors, but there might be some schizophrenic investors. VEB, what does VEB do? Because I'm very pleased also to be able to give some comments here today. VEB represents investors, and it doesn't shy away from launching legal proceedings against companies. That is something that we need to stress. Sometimes we want to bite, if you will. 3 points. What we need is, to us, because we represent investors, what investors need. And that means that we need such information that we are capable of measuring companies against their performance on sustainability. And I think that is a very important point. We need performance. The European Commission has also stressed that, where it commented on its proposals towards sustainable corporate finance. We need to see performance. Then I want to say something about audit assurance, and finally something about the role of the audit committee. Now let me start by saying, because that's very important to us, we are absolutely, whatever you call it, but let's just call it grateful, and we are supportive of the proposal. We think it is a very good development, and so therefore we should be seen, and we hope to be seen, as being constructive in the debate. As I already said, to my first point, what do we need? We need to be genuinely capable to measure sustainability performance. So performance instead of reporting, and I stress this word, it sounds very negatively, guff. It's a bit in line with the comment that was made by Victor van Hoorn already. He didn't use the word guff, but sometimes we see companies making promises whereby all matter of wordsmithing is being used to describe what they're going to do towards, for example, meeting climate targets. We need to be capable of measuring companies on their performance. And this also is in line with the comment already made by Victor van Hoorn. Why can investors be bothered? Think about big oil, it's just been mentioned. If big oil commits to the Paris Agreement and commits to being carbon neutral, as I said, there's a lot of guff around this term, the world is looking for measurability of companies' progress towards the attainment of these goals. And there is an avalanche of developments. It's already been also mentioned by Victor, the IEA's report. That clearly states that if we were to attain the Paris goals ever, the Paris targets, there must not be any more new oil or gas exploration initiatives. We need to be able to measure companies against that. And one good measure, by the way, is the carbon tracker disclosure assessment. So that is what we need. Then to my second point, audit assurance. Our main concern is that audit assurance is under the proposal for the time being limited assurance only. It's been mentioned. This is not what we wish for. We firmly believe that the standard ought to be set at reasonable assurance. I'm aware it's also been said already that the proposal says there is a progressive approach to enhance the level of assurance, and the Commission is to adopt reasonable assurance standards. There is a genuine concern on my part that that may be the subject to a lot of palavering, that there will be continued uncertainty and thereby a very lengthy process towards ever getting to those standards. Then the third point, and my last point, the role of the audit committee. In VEB's view, and we've already been very pronounced about that, the audit committee's function is to be the central pivot in a company's relation with the external auditor. The proposal requires that the sustainability reporting be audited. This has already been mentioned, and this is precisely where the audit committee comes into play. Now, the proposal's provisions in this regard, so with particular regard to audit committees, are appreciated, but they are quite open-ended. All that is required is that the role of the audit committee, literally the audit committee itself, explains how it contributed to the integrity of sustainability reporting and what the role of the audit committee was in that process. Now, as was already back in 2014 when the audit regulation was adopted, the audit committee, it was then said, and that was the central idea, ought to be given teeth. It must be given such powers and authority as to enable it to perform its tasks. We aren't there yet where this is concerned. I may perhaps attract your attention to the nomination process of auditors, external auditors, and general meetings. In many EU countries, the audit regulation is not observed where it comes to the role of the audit committee towards the appointment by the general meeting of the external auditor. And this is in our own experience, is not being picked up by the regulators. We see certain ideas towards increasing the role of the audit committee. One was, this was launched almost in passing recently in the Netherlands, that audit committees ought to be put under independent supervision by a governing body. Now, as I'm the last to speak, I should conclude now. The proof of the eating is, sorry, the proof of the pudding, I should turn that around. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. For us, the proof of the proposal by the European Commission is in getting literally genuine performance on sustainability instead of reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Armand. With your intervention, which was supposed to be, of course, constructive to the debate, as you mentioned, but nevertheless, you had, of course, a few points of what then would be constructive criticism. We have come to the end of the initial interventions. We would like now to move to the questions. We already received quite a few questions through the Q&A function. If you also have a question, please drop it in the Q&A window. Maybe I will group the questions as we received quite a few. One of the questions, or actually several of them, are going into the value chain assessment. And maybe I would like to go to Elena Flores. You also mentioned that there would be, you expect data requirements on your customers and clients. Can you already share with us how you think that this, say, a value chain assessment will occur, and what the burden would be for your clients, and in particular the SMEs, as that's also, I think, one of the main concerns that is expressed in the debate so far. Afterwards, I will ask, of course, also Elena Flores to comment on this. Elena?
Okay, I will start on what I was mentioning before about the fact that as financial institutions, we also need data from non-financial companies that we have in our portfolios, looking, for example, at taxonomy regulation and reporting disclosures. There is, let's say, more and more requests about taxonomy eligible activities, about taxonomy aligned activities, the percentage of these that we have in our portfolio. So being part of working groups launched by the EBF and UNEP-FI on implementing taxonomy regulation on financial portfolios, what we have seen is that it is very difficult for financial institutions to have the data from our corporate clients. So actually, because it's not only looking at companies, you have to look at activities. You have to check the technical screening criteria, do not significant harm and so forth. So unless we have information from non-financial companies that we can put in our systems and then disclose, otherwise we would need to use coefficients, looking at NACE codes, looking at sector codes and applying sector codes everywhere, which means that we will have some average disclosure on that. If we want to be more precise on that, first we need to get data from our customers, include them into our systems, and then we will be able to have, let's say, quality information to report on to in this research. So I was making reference to this point in particular. And the second point is that more and more, as financial institutions, we are requested to look at the ESG performance of our corporate clients in order to orient our credit, our investments. So that's the idea of the Commission, to reorient financial flows towards sustainability activities. So in order to have to manage this role, this crucial role that was given to financial institutions, we need to have ESG data, quality and comparable ESG data from our customers.
Okay, thank you very much. Elena?
Minor reaction. I mean, of course, this information will be requested from clients or from smaller companies in the supply chain. That is a knock-on effect that it's basically unavoidable, but not only because of the regulation in place, but also because regardless of any regulation, investors really need this information and they need to be able to assess the risk. So let's not forget that this is happening even without regulatory intervention. So in this respect, that's the first point I wanted to make. And then the second point, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we are very much aware that this is happening already and that it is likely to increase as a consequence of the SFDR, the taxonomy, and even the new CSRD proposal. But it's because of that we need to make sure that SMEs, especially SMEs, have these tools available to be able to participate also in this process, because for us, it's also no alternative that these companies just do not give any information and they are kept out from this process. Because in the end, if the information is not available, the investor will go somewhere else, or the bank will put some problems in giving the money, etc., etc. So at the end of the day, we need to make sure that they have the tools and that they have the help needed so that they are part of this transition. So these SME standards that will be for voluntary use for all those SMEs, the very large majority of SMEs not under the scope, we think are a key tool as well and a key element of the proposal, even if it's not a legal requirement, but it will be for voluntary use out there. And we did it very much conscious of this need of helping all those companies put together the information in one single way available for anyone who might need it. So for sure, there is a lot of focus on the standards, not only for this, but also for the standards for larger companies, the mandatory ones. And indeed, we need to get them right. I mean, it's crucial that these standards get all these aspects right to make sure that the companies are given the information that the users really need and that their efforts basically serve a purpose. So indeed, we'll keep a very close eye on this level 2 measures, on these standards, and the SME standards concretely are a key element in our view.
Thank you, Elena. We also received a few other questions, I think more directed towards you. One is about basically the data collection, whether it's still necessary to also collect it at national level if you will have already an EU portal, and what kind of identification numbers will be used to identify the companies. There's someone here indicating to use the LEI code.
Yeah. About the LEI or the LEI code, in that context, it will really depend on how it's articulated within SF. So because SF already requires this partly. So if the tagging of sustainability information is done as part of SF, which is the plan, then as part of SF, the identification will be used. I mean, that's just comes together in a way, but that's only in the context of this tagging of sustainability information, making it machine readable. In the context of national databases versus ESEP, I'm not dealing in detail with the ESEP proposal, but I don't believe that we are going to intervene in any way on what member states want to do. So this is really a European proposal, a European approach, and that will be set out to make sure that at EU level there is a single access point for all financial and sustainability information publicly reported by companies. What member states keep doing at national level, it's not in the remit of the EU in this moment to look into. But any concrete questions or more detailed questions about ESEP, please also feel free to send them to us in writing, and I'll consult with colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Maybe then to some more questions we received. One point is, of course, the international coherence. We received it, I think, throughout the panel, of course. How to avoid double reporting, I think, was an important concern from Elena, from Jean-Philippe, of course, also, and Victor. I think also that it's becoming comparable across the different jurisdictions. How will the Commission ensure this? Because, of course, this world is quite rapidly changing in terms of standards and practices.
Well, as I said, the idea is that all these frameworks, not the EU framework with all these global developments, let's see also in the end what really happens, are coherent. So if we are thinking of the IFRS Foundation Initiative, for instance, and if they start building on the TCFD framework, it's clear that the European standards will also build on the TCFD framework as they will build on the existing elements of the ERI, SASB, IRC, etc. So I find it's relatively easy to ensure a coherent framework, especially if we have the 4 pillars of the TCFD, which are already embedded even in the level 1 structure of the proposal. So in that respect, as I said, there is this communication, this two-way communication between these global initiatives and the EU. And the idea is that we make sure that, although of course we'll go further and we'll cover all ESG topics and the double materiality approach will be respected, still that this can be coherent, and even that different parts can be identified, if you like, of what would correspond or what would match the lower, if you like, ambitious level of the global standard compared to the rest of the information. This, what they call building block approach, could be a way of doing it, but that doesn't mean, and it's important we clarify this, that doesn't mean that we adapt to whatever is done at global level. I mean, this conversation really needs to happen in both directions, because we need to make sure that our framework is coherent. So of course, it's not an easy thing to achieve. It's not, we don't have all the answers today, but we're in the process of ensuring this communication with all these international initiatives. And the objective is very clear from the EU perspective. I mean, this coordinated approach and this communication with the relevant global initiatives is already happening. A couple of meetings already happened with all the relevant global initiatives, and also including all the GRIs and SASBs, etc. So it's at the core of our thinking and of our concern, and we really hope this won't end up in any fragmentation and so on. And also as regards the other existing standards, again, the idea is to build on what's out there and to have a reference point. So we really think and we really hope we'll get it very good and very right with the standards, so that they can be seen as a reference point, and then companies won't get ad hoc requests to report against SASB, because the important elements of SASB would already be in the standards. So in that respect, one of the biggest objectives from the company perspective in the proposal, and you can see that in the impact assessment, is basically to remove and to get rid of all those ad hoc requests, because basically the public information available would already meet those needs from users. So again, we're working on it. Let's see how the process in EFRAG goes in developing the standards, and we are in very close contact with the relevant standard setting initiatives and existing and upcoming ones.
Thank you very much, Elena. We have reached the end of the scheduled time, but I would still like to give the other panelists also a quick final word. So maybe to start with Victor, is there something that you would still would like to share with the participants in the call this morning?
No, maybe just to jump on the remarks. Fully agree with what Elena from the Commission just said. I think the way we look at it, there is just the acknowledgement is that you can certainly build a system that is compatible with each other and that you can work together. But the fact is, if you look at the level of ambitions from now, the way the EU is going about it is more ambitious than what's happening at international level. And I think if you always have to achieve international consensus at international level, I would expect that that's a process that takes time. So I would say, we very much encourage the idea that it's nice to have convergence if we can have it, but that doesn't mean we should stop at European level. And again, the common standards will be great, but it will not solve all the problems in terms of consistency. And just to give you a very concrete example, when it comes to climate and reporting on CO2 emissions, we have a very fragmented international market when it comes to carbon pricing. So eventually, the average carbon price, according to the World Bank, worldwide is around $2 per ton of CO2. In the EU, it's 50 euros per ton of CO2. That's going to be reflected in the reporting, whether you have the same standard or not. This fragmentation is always going to exist from a financial materiality perspective. So I think we also have to be careful not to expecting that the standard will solve all our problems or all our challenges.
Okay, thanks a lot, Victor. Jean-Philippe?
Yes, one final conclusion regarding the question of data. I heard that there is a reflection of project at the EU level to finance the creation of a public database in open source where all European corporates will put their ESG data, and that this data will be open to all stakeholders, including investors. I think it's a great idea, opportunity, and it will be a great investment for all European corporate and stakeholders. So I encourage this idea in the name of EFAS. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Philippe. Armand?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that tomorrow we will probably see the judgment in the court case that was brought by environmental activists against Shell. That is, of course, going to be a very interesting thing to see, because, as I said earlier, with all the good developments that we see, I think it is very important that we hold both companies, but also governments, to account where there is no performance against sustainability targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armand. Elena, the floor.
Well, no more comments on my side. I share most of the comments that were given today, and I also thank very much the other Elena for presenting the proposal and for taking into account all the requests that are arriving on that. And of course, we are very available to contribute to the debate as well. So thank you.
So thank you very much to all the panelists this morning for sharing their views, and I think contributing to a very interesting discussion in which we unfortunately have not solved all the issues related to sustainability reporting, but I hope we clarified some of the issues. So for now, I would like to thank you all for also participating in the call. If you like, it's possible to rewatch this webinar on YouTube, and we will have our next CEPS webinar on the 7th of June. So you will receive also some invitation for that one. So thank you very much for participating this morning, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.